The first day she walked into my office, I knew my life was about to change, though I would never have admitted it out loud. There was something about her presence, soft yet bold, nervous but hiding an untamed spark, that made the air feel heavier, warmer. She was my new intern, a girl who looked too young to carry the kind of determination in her eyes, and yet, there she was, standing in front of me with her trembling hands clutching a notebook like it was her shield. I had worked with dozens of interns before. Most came and went, leaving nothing behind but half-finished projects and polite goodbyes. But when she entered, time slowed, and I caught myself noticing the way she pushed her hair back from her face, the way her lips parted as though she had 1,000 questions but wasn't sure which one to ask first. I shook the thought away. She was just an intern. I was her mentor. That was all this was supposed to be. Still, when she knelt down beside me that afternoon, whispering in a voice that was almost a shiver, "Am I doing this right?" My heart forgot every rule it had ever learned. I had been reviewing files when she came close, too close for comfort. Her shoulder brushed mine as she bent down, and I tried to focus on the lines of numbers in front of me, but all I could hear was the quick, unsteady rhythm of her breathing. Her question wasn't about the spreadsheet, not really. It was about something deeper, something unspoken between us. My chest tightened, and for a moment I didn't know if I should answer her or step away. Instead, I stayed still, almost frozen in the heat of that closeness. My hand moved slightly on the desk, and hers followed, like a shadow, stopping just short of touching mine. I could feel the electricity of her presence, a kind of pull I had never experienced with anyone before. The day had started like any other. I arrived at the office early, coffee in hand, already buried under deadlines. She had introduced herself politely, stammering a little when I asked about her background. Her words tumbled out in a rush, and yet there was honesty in every syllable. She was eager to learn, desperate to prove herself, and I admired that. But it wasn't her ambition that unsettled me, it was the way her eyes lingered on me, not with the timid glances of a student, but with something warmer, something that made me feel exposed. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it. By the time afternoon arrived, I was failing miserably when she whispered those words, leaning in so close I could feel her breath graze my cheek. I couldn't stop the thought that shot through my mind. This is dangerous. I reminded myself of the rules, the unspoken codes of professionalism. But then I looked at her, really looked, and saw the nervous courage hidden beneath her trembling voice. She wasn't trying to seduce me, she was trying to connect, to be seen, to find reassurance in someone she trusted. And yet, that trust carried a weight that made my throat dry. I answered softly, keeping my voice steady, guiding her through the task, but my heart betrayed me, thudding against my ribs as though it wanted to break free. She smiled faintly, relieved, and that smile, gentle, unguarded, was the kind that stayed with you long after the moment had passed. I wanted to look away, to keep the wall between us intact, but instead I found myself memorizing the curve of her lips, the way her eyes lit up when she understood something. It was unfair, I told myself. Unfair to her, unfair to me. But feelings rarely cared about fairness. The rest of the day passed in fragments. I caught myself watching her when I shouldn't have. She laughed at something a colleague said, and I felt an unexpected twist in my chest. She brushed a strand of hair from her face, and I wanted to reach out, to tuck it behind her ear myself. The distance between us grew smaller with every second, even though we barely moved. By the time she packed her bag to leave, the office felt emptier than it had that morning, as if her presence had filled spaces I didn't know were hollow. That night, I sat alone with my thoughts, replaying the moment she leaned close, the whisper of her voice, the almost touch of her hand. I had told myself for years that love, attraction, even the idea of being vulnerable, belonged to the past. My life was about work, stability, control. But then she arrived, breaking down every carefully built wall with nothing more than her presence. I should have been stronger. I should have pushed the feelings away. Instead, I found myself wondering what tomorrow would bring, and whether she would lean close again, whispering in that soft, uncertain voice that somehow managed to shake the strongest parts of me. The next morning I arrived earlier than usual, though I would never admit I had done it just to avoid walking in at the same time as her. I told myself it was about discipline, about setting the right example, but deep down I knew it was because my chest still carried the memory of her whisper. The office was quiet, bathed in the pale light of dawn, and for a moment I let myself breathe, convincing my heart that yesterday had been nothing more than imagination. But when the door creaked open and I heard her voice softly greeting the receptionist, all those carefully rehearsed denials fell apart. She walked toward me with a cautious smile, one that seemed both nervous and intentional, as though she wasn't sure how close to stand yet wanted to linger anyway. I greeted her with a steady voice, hiding the storm inside, and watched her take her place at the desk beside mine. She seemed more confident today, less hesitant, though every now and then her eyes would drift toward me like she was searching for approval without daring to ask. We began working on the morning reports together, and I tried to keep my instructions professional, clipped, safe. But she had a way of turning even the simplest question into something intimate. She leaned close again, not as boldly as yesterday, but close enough that her perfume drifted between us. It wasn't strong, just faintly floral, but it clung to my senses, distracting me from the spreadsheets. She asked questions with an eagerness that made me want to answer in more than just numbers and formulas. Her laughter, small, almost shy, slipped out when she made a mistake, and the sound warmed the room in ways the fluorescent lights never could. I wanted to tell her how that laugh could soften the hardest day, but instead I only corrected her gently, keeping my tone steady while my thoughts betrayed me. Midday came, and we shared a quiet lunch in the break room. Most of the staff had gone out, leaving just the two of us with our sandwiches and the hum of the vending machine. At first, we spoke about small things, college, her ambitions, the projects she hoped to work on. She was bright, far brighter than she gave herself credit for, and listening to her talk reminded me of a younger version of myself, hungry to prove something, desperate to be seen. Then her eyes lingered on mine a second too long, and the air between us shifted again, heavy with something unspoken. She set her sandwich down, her fingers brushing the table as though she were searching for courage. "I don't want to mess this up," she admitted quietly, almost like a confession. I wanted to ask her what she truly meant, this internship, or something else, but instead I told her she was doing well, better than she realized. Her shoulders relaxed, and the smile she gave me in return was softer, almost vulnerable, like she was giving me a piece of herself she didn't offer easily. That afternoon, I caught her humming under her breath as she worked, a tune I didn't recognize but one that made the air feel lighter. I found myself smiling at the sound before I could stop it. She noticed and blushed, embarrassed, but I assured her it was beautiful. She thanked me, her voice barely above a whisper, and I realized then how rare it was for her to let down her guard completely. Every little piece she revealed felt like a secret meant only for me, and I couldn't help but treasure it. Still, I reminded myself over and over that this was dangerous ground. I had responsibilities. She was younger, new, uncertain. And yet, no matter how much I repeated those warnings, my heart kept betraying me, pulling me closer to the very thing I swore I shouldn't want. As the day came to a close, she lingered longer than necessary, packing her things slowly, almost reluctantly. I pretended to stay busy, watching from the corner of my eye as she tucked her hair behind her ear and glanced at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you for being patient with me." It was a simple sentence, yet it carried more weight than the words alone could hold. I looked at her, really looked, and for a brief moment the world outside the office didn't exist. I wanted to say something honest, something real, but all I managed was a quiet, "You're welcome." She smiled at that, and for the second time in 2 days, I felt the emptiness settle in as she walked away. That night, lying awake in the silence of my apartment, I realized the truth I had been trying to bury. She wasn't just an intern, and I wasn't just her mentor. Something larger was weaving itself between us, something that defied the rules I had lived by for so long. I should have been afraid, but instead I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. Her whisper still echoed in my mind, her smile still lit up the corners of my memory, and all I could think about was the way tomorrow might bring us closer, even if neither of us dared to admit it out loud. The following day began with the same routine, but nothing felt routine anymore. I walked into the office carrying the weight of sleepless hours, the memory of her smile refusing to leave me alone. I told myself I would set boundaries, that I would build a wall thick enough to keep her out of my thoughts, but the moment she stepped through the door, all those walls crumbled like paper. She looked brighter that morning, more at ease, as though the nervousness that once clung to her had softened. She greeted me with a warmth that spread through the room, and though I returned it with a polite nod, inside I felt a pull I couldn't resist. Her eyes met mine with that same unspoken question, "Will you see me today, not just as your intern, but as something more?" I pretended not to notice, but every fiber of me was already answering. We settled into work quickly, the hum of keyboards filling the silence. She asked thoughtful questions, the kind that showed she wasn't just doing tasks, she was learning, absorbing, growing. I admired her for that, but admiration was only the beginning of what I felt. At one point, she leaned over again to show me her progress, her hand brushing dangerously close to mine on the desk. It was unintentional, perhaps, but the jolt that shot through me was anything but accidental. I felt her glance at me, almost as if she wanted to know if I had felt it too. I didn't move, didn't speak, just kept my eyes fixed on the screen, though every nerve in my body was awake, alive, restless. Later that morning, we reviewed a project together, her handwriting covering the pages with neat notes and diagrams. She explained her ideas with excitement, her voice quickening when she spoke of solutions she had discovered on her own. I listened, captivated by more than her intellect. Her hands moved as she spoke, expressive and alive, and I caught myself staring, not at the words she had written, but at the way her fingers curled slightly when she emphasized a point. I forced myself to refocus, to remind myself that this was work. Yet when she noticed my silence and looked at me with a nervous little smile, asking, "Do you think it's good enough?" my heart betrayed me. I wanted to tell her she was more than good enough, that everything she did seemed to carry light. Instead, I gave a measured nod and praised her effort in safe, professional words. Her relief showed in her eyes, but beneath it I sensed something else, something that mirrored the storm inside me. By lunchtime, the air between us had grown heavy with the things neither of us said. We went to the cafe across the street, a neutral ground, though it felt anything but neutral with her sitting across from me, sipping her drink and glancing up through her lashes. She asked about my life, not out of politeness but genuine curiosity. I hesitated, knowing I didn't share easily, but her attention was patient, encouraging, like she was giving me permission to be vulnerable. Against my better judgment, I told her small pieces, about the long hours, the pressure, the loneliness that sometimes crept in when the office lights went off. She listened without judgment, and for the first time in years, I felt truly heard. Then she surprised me by sharing her own fears, confessing that she worried she wasn't enough, that she doubted her place here. I leaned forward, caught in the sincerity of her words, and reassured her that she belonged, that she had more strength than she realized. Her eyes softened, shimmering with gratitude, and for a moment, the world around us blurred until it was only her and me, two people holding on to an invisible thread pulling us closer. That afternoon, I tried to throw myself into work, desperate to drown out the intensity of our connection, but it was impossible. Every time she shifted in her chair, every time she hummed softly while concentrating, my focus slipped. The room felt too small for the weight of what lingered between us. At one point, she came to stand beside me again, leaning over the desk, her shoulder brushing mine as she pointed at something on the screen. She whispered, asking if she had done it right, and though it was an innocent question about her work, the words carried the same echo as before. My pulse raced, and I swallowed hard, managing only a quiet yes, you did, while my mind screamed with everything I couldn't say. She smiled, and that smile broke me open in ways I couldn't explain. When the day ended, neither of us rushed to leave. She lingered, shuffling papers slowly, as though waiting for something. I pretended to organize files, my hands shaking slightly though I hid it well. Finally, she looked at me, her expression hesitant but brave. I feel like I can trust you, she said softly, and the simplicity of the statement left me speechless. Trust. Such a small word, but with her it felt like a gift I didn't deserve. I wanted to respond, to tell her that she could trust me with more than just her work, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I nodded, and in that silence something passed between us, unspoken but undeniable. That night, back in the solitude of my home, I realized how far I had already fallen. What began as curiosity had grown into something deeper, something that consumed my thoughts even in the stillness of the night. Her voice lingered, her smile haunted me, and the memory of her closeness burned in my chest. I told myself I needed to draw lines, to protect us both, but the truth was clear, I didn't want distance. I wanted more, even if I was too afraid to admit it out loud. The morning light felt heavier than usual as I stepped into the office, carrying with me the restlessness of another night spent thinking about her. I had turned over countless thoughts in my head, arguing with myself about boundaries, rules, and consequences, but none of it mattered the moment I saw her waiting by my desk. She looked up at me with that quiet, almost hesitant smile that had begun to carve itself into my chest. Her hair was slightly undone, as though she had rushed, but it only made her look more real, more human, more captivating. She greeted me softly, her voice lower than usual, like she was unsure how close to let herself be this time. I answered with measured calm, but inside, I felt the storm return, stronger than ever. We settled into our work, though my attention was torn in two directions, the tasks on the screen and the presence beside me that demanded more of me than any deadline ever could. She had grown more comfortable now, asking questions without as much hesitation, leaning in with a quiet confidence that both impressed and unnerved me. At one point, she brushed past me to reach for a file, her hand grazing my arm, and though it was a simple accident, it felt like an earthquake beneath my skin. She froze for a second, eyes flicking up to mine, and in that fleeting glance there was something raw, something unguarded, something that made my breath catch. Neither of us spoke about it, but the silence held a truth we couldn't deny. By midday, the office buzzed with life, colleagues moving in and out, but between her and me, the world seemed to shrink into a bubble of its own. We were reviewing notes together when she suddenly grew quiet, her pen tapping against the paper. I asked if something was wrong, and she shook her head, though her eyes betrayed her thoughts. After a pause, she whispered, "Do you ever feel like you're living a life that isn't really yours?" The question hit deeper than she knew. I looked at her, seeing not just a young intern but a soul carrying questions bigger than her age. I wanted to tell her yes, that I had felt that way for years, that sometimes I still did. Instead, I softened my voice and said, "More often than you think." She exhaled, a fragile sound, and for a moment, the air between us was charged with the kind of honesty people rarely shared. We ate lunch together again, this time at her suggestion. She was more open, more curious, asking about things I usually kept locked away, my past, my choices, the walls I had built around myself. I gave her small pieces, nothing too revealing, but she listened with such intensity that it made me want to tell her everything. Then, quietly, she began sharing about her own life. She spoke of loneliness, of feeling unseen, of the constant pressure to prove her worth. Her words cracked something in me because they echoed too closely to my own unspoken battles. When she admitted that she often doubted herself, I leaned in without thinking and told her she was more than enough. Her eyes glistened, and though she blinked the tears away quickly, I saw the vulnerability she had tried to hide. It was in that moment I realized how much she trusted me already, how much she was giving without asking for anything in return. The afternoon passed slowly, filled with the weight of emotions we couldn't name. She stood beside me often, pointing at her work, asking if she was on the right track, and every time she leaned close, my chest tightened. Once, she whispered again, her breath brushing my ear, "Is this okay?" It was about her work, but the sound of her voice, low and trembling, carried more than just professional doubt. I answered carefully, but inside I was unraveling. Each whisper, each glance, each accidental touch was weaving a thread I knew I wouldn't be able to cut. When the day ended, she lingered again. The office emptied around us, leaving only the two of us in the dim glow of the overhead lights. She packed her bag slowly, glancing at me as though searching for something. Finally, she broke the silence. "I don't want to be a burden," she said, her voice barely audible. The words pierced me because I knew she wasn't talking about work. I set down my pen and looked at her, choosing my words with care. "You're not a burden," I told her softly. "Not here. Not to me." She held my gaze longer than she ever had before, and in her eyes, I saw both fear and hope tangled together. As she left, I sat in the quiet office, my hands trembling on the desk. I told myself again that this was dangerous, that I had to stop it before it went too far. But the truth was I didn't want to stop. I wanted to hear her whisper again, to see her smile when I reassured her, to feel that invisible thread pull tighter around us. That night, lying awake, I admitted the truth to myself. I was falling, deeper than I had planned, deeper than I thought possible. And for the first time in years, I didn't want to climb back out. The following morning began with a storm outside, rain lashing against the windows, the sky dark and heavy, and somehow it felt like a mirror of the storm that had been growing inside me. I sat at my desk earlier than usual, staring at my computer screen, pretending to focus but really just rehearsing all the ways I would keep my distance. I told myself today had to be different, that I couldn't keep letting her get so close, but when she walked in, slightly damp from the rain, her hair clinging to her cheeks, my resolve shattered in an instant. She smiled at me softly, her voice light as she apologized for being late, and I felt something inside me shift. There was no wall strong enough to withstand her presence. She didn't even know the power she carried. She settled into her chair, wiping the rain from her hands with a small laugh, and I caught myself staring longer than I should have. The sound of her laughter filled the space with a kind of warmth that made the storm outside irrelevant. I asked if she was cold, and she admitted she was, wrapping her arms around herself. I wanted, more than anything, to reach out, to offer comfort, but instead I pushed a spare sweater I kept in my drawer toward her. She hesitated, looking at me as though the gesture meant more than it should, then accepted it with a grateful smile that nearly stopped my heart. She slipped it over her shoulders, and when I saw her surrounded in something that belonged to me, something I had touched, I felt a quiet intimacy settle between us. The morning passed with a rhythm that felt different from the days before. She worked with focus, asking for my input now and then, but there was a calmness to her today, as if the rain had slowed her down. At one point, she leaned back in her chair and sighed, watching the raindrops streak down the window. "It feels like the world is trying to wash itself clean," she said softly, almost to herself. I looked at her, the faint sadness in her tone lingering in the air, and I wanted to ask her what she meant, what memories or wounds hid behind those words. Instead, I told her I liked the way she saw things, and when she turned to me with a small, vulnerable smile, I knew she understood that I wasn't just talking about the weather. We had lunch in the office that day, the rain keeping us inside. She pulled out a sandwich, and I shared some of the soup I had brought from home. It felt oddly intimate, eating from the same container, passing bread back and forth, like something two people who were more than colleagues might do. Between bites, she opened up more than ever before. She told me about her childhood, about the struggles she had faced being different, about how she had always felt like an outsider looking in. Her voice wavered when she admitted she had never really felt chosen, never truly felt like someone saw her for who she was. My chest ached at her words, because in that moment, I wanted nothing more than to tell her I saw her. Not just the intern, not just the eager learner, but the woman sitting across from me, with all her fears and beauty laid bare. In the afternoon, we worked side by side in silence, yet it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence full of presence, full of awareness, like both of us were listening to something deeper than words. Every now and then, she would glance at me, her eyes holding questions she didn't dare to ask, and each time, I felt the tension between us coil tighter. At one point, she reached across the desk to grab a paper, and her hand brushed mine, just lightly, but enough to make me flinch inside. She froze, her fingers lingering for a heartbeat longer than necessary, and when she pulled away, she didn't look ashamed or embarrassed, she looked searching, as though trying to gauge if I felt what she did. I didn't move, didn't speak, but my silence told its own story. As the rain continued to pour outside, the office emptied earlier than usual. People rushed home to escape the storm, leaving just the two of us behind. The quiet felt heavier with no distractions, no footsteps in the hallways, no voices in the background. She stayed at her desk, not rushing to leave, and I stayed too, even though I had finished my work hours ago. At some point, she stood and walked over to my side, holding the file she had been working on. She bent slightly, her shoulder brushing mine as she whispered, "Can you check this for me?" Her voice trembled, softer than before, but it wasn't just nerves about her work, it was something else, something that made my pulse race. I leaned closer, the distance between us shrinking until I could feel the warmth of her body against mine. I gave her feedback quietly, my voice low, almost as though we were sharing a secret. When I handed the file back, she didn't move away right away. Instead, she lingered, her eyes searching mine with a rawness that made my breath catch. For a moment, the storm outside felt like it was inside us too, wild and uncontrollable. I wanted to reach for her, to bridge the tiny gap between us, but I held back, gripping the edge of the desk to steady myself. Finally, she pulled away, whispering a quiet thank you before walking back to her seat. But even then, I could feel her presence like a shadow beside me, heavy and consuming. That night, lying in bed, I thought of her wearing my sweater, of her laughter mingling with the sound of rain, of her eyes when she asked if I ever felt like I wasn't living my own life. The truth I had been denying for days settled deeper into me. I wasn't just drawn to her, I was changing because of her. The walls I had lived behind for so long were crumbling, piece by piece, and I didn't know if I could, or even wanted to, rebuild them. The storm had passed by the next morning, leaving the streets washed clean, but inside me the storm only grew heavier. I told myself on the walk to work that I would draw lines today, that I would put space where closeness had already blurred too much. But the moment she entered the office, carrying a small coffee cup and smiling like the sun after rain, every resolution I had crumbled. She placed one of the cups on my desk without a word, her eyes shy but hopeful. "I thought you might need it," she murmured, and I could only stare at her for a moment, struck silent by the tenderness in such a small act. I thanked her quietly, trying to sound casual, but my heart was already racing as if she had handed me more than coffee, as if she had placed a piece of herself in my hands. We worked through the morning with a rhythm that felt strangely comfortable, almost domestic. She asked questions now with less hesitation, her confidence blooming day by day, and I found myself proud of her, not just as her mentor but as someone who cared deeply about her growth. Every time she caught my eye and smiled when she understood something, I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with professionalism. At one point, she leaned over to show me her notes, and when our hands brushed against each other, neither of us moved away this time. It was brief, but it was deliberate, and the silence that followed was heavier than any words could be. Around midday, she asked if I wanted to step outside for lunch, her voice careful, almost testing the waters. I agreed, though I knew I shouldn't have, and we walked together to a quiet park nearby. The ground was still damp from the rain, but the sky was clear, and we found a bench tucked away from the busy streets. She unwrapped her sandwich and handed me half without asking if I wanted it, as if it were natural to share. We talked about small things at first, the weather, books she was reading, stories from her university, but then the conversation drifted deeper, almost without us realizing. She asked me what made me happiest, a question I hadn't thought about in years, and I sat in silence for a long moment before answering. I told her that happiness, for me, had always been tied to moments of connection, moments where someone truly understood me. She looked at me then, her eyes soft, and whispered, "I think I understand you." Those words shook me more than they should have, and I had to look away, afraid she would see too much in my expression. The afternoon back at the office was quiet, yet everything between us felt louder. She hummed while working again, the same soft tune, and I found myself memorizing it, as though it were part of her I could hold on to. At one point, she stood by my desk, leaning closer than she needed to, and whispered, "I don't want to disappoint you." It wasn't about the assignment, I could hear it in the tremor of her voice. I wanted to tell her she could never disappoint me, not in the ways that mattered, but I kept my words measured, telling her she was doing better than she realized. Her shoulders relaxed, and she gave me a smile so radiant it made me forget every reason I had for restraint. As the day came to a close, the office emptied, and once again it was just the two of us. She didn't pack her things immediately this time. Instead, she lingered by her desk, her hands resting on the edge as though she were gathering courage. Finally, she walked over to me, her step slow, deliberate. She stopped just a breath away, close enough that I could feel the heat of her presence. "Can I ask you something?" she whispered, her voice trembling but steady enough to carry weight. I nodded, my chest tight. She hesitated, then looked straight into my eyes. "Why do I feel like there's more here than just work?" The question hung between us, sharp and fragile, and I felt the world tilt. I wanted to deny it, to put the wall back up, to say it was nothing but her imagination. But in her eyes, I saw the same fire that burned in me, the same questions, the same fear, the same longing. My throat tightened, and all I could manage was, "Because maybe there is." Her lips parted, her breath catching, and for a long moment we just stood there, caught in the gravity of something we both knew was bigger than us. She finally broke the silence with a nervous laugh, stepping back just slightly, but her eyes never left mine. "I thought I was imagining it," she admitted softly. I shook my head, unable to trust my voice to say more. The tension in the room was almost unbearable, a fragile thread stretched to its breaking point. When she finally gathered her bag and whispered a quiet goodbye, I sat frozen in my chair long after she left, my heart pounding with the weight of what had just been spoken aloud. That night, I replayed every word, every glance, every brush of her hand. The truth we had both danced around was no longer hidden. She had seen it, admitted it, placed it between us like a fragile secret, and I had let it stay. There was no going back now. Whatever line I thought I could draw had already vanished, and all that remained was the dangerous, beautiful possibility of what came next. The next morning I felt different, as though the air itself had shifted. The memory of her question from the night before echoed in me, "Why do I feel like there's more here than just work?" And the way I had answered it left no room for retreat. I had opened the door, even slightly, and now every step forward felt heavier with meaning. I tried to convince myself to act normal, to keep things steady, but the truth was nothing between us could ever be normal again. When she walked in, her smile softer than usual, her eyes lingering on me a little longer, I knew she felt it too. She greeted me quietly, almost shyly, and as she settled into her chair, I caught myself holding my breath like I was waiting for something inevitable to happen. The day unfolded with a strange mixture of routine and tension. We worked side by side, our voices calm, our words professional, but beneath it all was the weight of what we both knew. Every time our eyes met, it was like a spark leaping across a gap, quick and undeniable. At one point, she leaned across my desk to show me her notes, her hand brushing against mine again, and this time she didn't pull back. She let it stay there for a moment, light but deliberate, her fingers just barely resting against me. My chest tightened, but I didn't move away. I couldn't. The silence stretched, and though no one else in the office noticed, for me it was a moment that felt louder than any sound in the world. Around midday, she asked if I wanted to take a walk outside, and though my better judgment told me to say no, I found myself agreeing without hesitation. The weather was calm, the streets busy, but walking beside her felt strangely private, like the world around us faded into a blur. We found ourselves by a small cafe, its outdoor seating nearly empty, and sat down with coffee. She spoke about her future, her dreams, her uncertainties, her voice carrying both hope and fear. She told me she wanted to do something meaningful, something that mattered, but she worried she wasn't strong enough. I listened closely, my heart aching with the urge to protect her from every doubt she carried. I told her she had more strength than she gave herself credit for, that she had already shown resilience in ways most people never did. She looked at me then, her eyes wet with emotion, and whispered, "You really see me, don't you?" I swallowed hard, knowing that if I spoke too honestly, I might reveal everything I was holding back. But I nodded slowly, letting my silence answer her question. Back at the office, the tension grew even heavier. She seemed more aware of the space between us, moving closer when she didn't need to, finding reasons to linger at my desk. At one point, she bent down to whisper a question, her lips so close to my ear that I felt the warmth of her breath. The words were about her work, but the tremor in her voice told me the meaning was far deeper. My pulse raced, and when I turned my head slightly, our eyes met at a distance so close it felt dangerous. For a heartbeat, I thought she might close that space entirely, but then she pulled back, leaving me shaken, my chest heaving with everything I couldn't say. As the day drew to a close, the office emptied again, leaving just the two of us. She didn't even pretend to pack quickly this time. Instead, she walked over to my desk slowly, her steps careful, her eyes fixed on me. She stopped in front of me, her hands twisting nervously, and whispered, "I don't know what to do with this, whatever this is between us." Her voice broke on the last words, and I felt every wall inside me crack. I stood slowly, meeting her gaze, my own voice trembling as I said, "Neither do I." We stood in silence, the distance between us barely a breath, the weight of unspoken feelings pressing down like gravity. For a long moment, I thought one of us would step back, retreat into safety. But then she reached out, her fingers brushing against mine, tentative but full of meaning. I didn't pull away. Instead, I let my hand turn, let our fingers weave together in a gesture that felt both terrifying and inevitable. The room seemed to still, the hum of the lights fading, the world outside disappearing until it was only her and me, standing in the fragile beginning of something we could no longer deny. When she finally whispered goodnight and let go of my hand, the space she left behind felt unbearable. I sat in the quiet after she left, staring at my hand where hers had been, knowing that everything had changed. That night, I lay awake again, but this time I wasn't fighting the truth. I had already crossed the line. She had too. And whatever tomorrow brought, there was no turning back. The morning after felt unlike any other. I woke with the memory of her hand in mine, the warmth of her touch lingering as though it had etched itself into my skin. My chest ached with both fear and longing, knowing we had stepped across a threshold that couldn't be ignored. I tried to steady myself, to plan what I would say, how I would act, but every time I imagined her eyes searching mine, every careful word I rehearsed crumbled into silence. The office was quiet when I arrived, but quiet in a way that made me restless. I sat at my desk pretending to work, though my mind was only on her, wondering if she felt the same ache, the same unbearable pull that I did. When she finally walked in, the room shifted. Her gaze found me immediately, and in her eyes was something soft, something unguarded, something that told me she too had not forgotten the weight of last night. She greeted me in a voice lower than usual, almost fragile, and for the first hour we worked without speaking much. But silence wasn't emptiness anymore, it was filled with everything we didn't dare say out loud. She leaned closer at times, her arm brushing mine, her presence a constant reminder that we were walking on a path with no map. Around midday, she asked if I would like to step out with her, and though I should have said no, my voice betrayed me with a quiet yes. We walked through the streets together, the world buzzing around us, yet it felt like there was only her and me. We found a small corner cafe, tucked away from the noise, and sat across from each other with coffee between us. Her hands played nervously with the rim of her cup, and after a long silence, she whispered, I can't keep pretending nothing's happening between us. My chest tightened, my breath caught, and I realized she had spoken the truth neither of us could escape. I told her I felt it too, that I had been fighting it, that I had tried to draw lines but every day with her tore those lines apart. She listened with tears glistening in her eyes, her lips trembling as though she wanted to speak but couldn't. Finally, she reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine again, and this time I didn't hesitate. I wrapped my hand around hers, firm and certain, and in that simple gesture, the air shifted. She exhaled a shaky breath, her eyes softening, and for the first time we let the silence hold the truth fully. No more denying. No more running back at the office, the weight between us transformed. We still worked, still carried on as though everything was normal, but beneath the surface there was an ease, a quiet certainty. She leaned close often, her voice softer, her smile braver, and each moment felt like a thread pulling us tighter. When the day ended and the office emptied, neither of us made the first move to leave. She stayed at her desk, glancing at me with eyes that told me she was waiting. I finally stood, walked to her side, and without speaking, held out my hand. She hesitated only for a second before slipping hers into mine. Together, we left the office, the night air cool against our skin, but inside me was only warmth. We walked in silence until she stopped beneath the glow of a streetlight, turning to me with a look I would never forget. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "I don't know what this will mean tomorrow, but right now, I don't want to let this go." Her honesty cracked something open in me, something I had kept locked away for years. I stepped closer, my heart pounding, and told her she didn't have to let go, not now, not ever, if she didn't want to. She smiled then, a smile full of relief and hope, and in that moment the world fell away. For the first time, we allowed the truth to live between us without fear, without hiding. That night, lying awake once more, I no longer felt restless. Instead, I felt alive, my chest full with a warmth I had thought I would never know again. She had stepped into my life as an intern, nervous and uncertain, and somewhere along the way she had become the light that tore down every wall I had built around my heart. I knew the road ahead would not be easy, that questions and challenges would wait for us, but none of it mattered. What mattered was the truth that had finally been spoken, the bond we had stopped pretending to ignore, the feeling that burned brighter than fear. She had asked me once if she was doing it right, and though she had meant her work, I realized the answer stretched far beyond that moment. Yes. She was doing it right. We were doing it right. And for the first time in years, I knew my life was no longer my own, it was ours, and I didn't want it any other way.